It has been 1 week since Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the quarantine lockdown in the United Kingdom. By the end of this video, you'll have an understanding as to what's happened socially in the UK following the announcement. And incidents range from attacks on police and medical staff, harassment of traffic wardens and postal workers, an increase in youth crime, as well as violence at supermarkets. There's also been an increase in fraud linked to COVID-19 and people coughing and spitting at people claiming to have coronavirus. So the first action I'm going to do is actually to deselect the map markers. And there are our incident icons. Now, what you can see are a group of blue and red buildings. Now, the blue buildings are either temporary field hospitals that have been created or that have been allocated as possible locations. Now, going from north to south, you have the former IBM factory in Greenock. You've got Glasgow SEC. You've got Manchester Arena. You've got Carmarthen Leisure Centre, Selwyn Samuels Centre, the Principality Stadium. You've also got the NEC in Birmingham, as well as NHS Nightingale, which has already been built. Now, the red icons are actual mortuary locations. Now, these are Kinniger Logistics Base, you've got Birmingham Airport, the Westminster Coroner's Court, which has had an extension added to it, and Agerton Fort as well. So the next thing I want to show you that has happened since the Prime Minister's announcement are the checkpoints that have been set up to actually enforce the lockdown. So if I bring back the map markers and remove the static assets, and I bring up the filtering options, now if I filter for tagged and checkpoint, you can see the checkpoint locations, and these are all the way from up in Canterbury Garrison down to the southwest of the country. The next thing I want to do is actually to highlight the attacks that have taken place against medical staff. So if I remove the tag of checkpoint and I enter the tag of attack on medical staff, it will bring up all incidents that have occurred in the United Kingdom after the 22nd of March. The Prime Minister's announcement was on the 23rd of March, and these are attacks on medical staff. So just going from the top, so we have a doctor's house in Colchester that was burgled whilst the doctor was actually on shift. A nurse was racially abused on her way home from work in Southampton. Now, the nurse, who was originally from the Philippines and works at the University Hospital of Southampton, she was racially abused and threatened by a group of teenagers as she walked home, and the group accused the nurse of bringing coronavirus to the UK and told her to go home to China. 2 cars of key workers were broken into and items stolen in Middlesbrough. An emergency worker was assaulted in Lincoln. An emergency response vehicle up in Stornoway was broken, and the windscreen was broken with a bottle. Now, this vehicle was only one of 2 that are used by the health board to reach patients as quickly as possible and was put out of action as a result. A man was also arrested for assaulting 3 NHS staff at York Hospital. An NHS worker was hit over the head with a bike seat at a supermarket in Birkenhead. 2 emergency service workers were spat at in Bridgewater. An emergency worker was spat at in Peasdown, St John in Bath. An emergency worker was coughed and spat at in Bridgewater. A group of youths who coughed at an NHS worker in Warrington will be prosecuted along with their parents. A teenager who coughed at a health worker and claimed to have COVID-19 in Bankery. A suspect remains at large, and the police are treating the incident as assault. A doctor was robbed by 3 perpetrators in Market Square in Harlow. Now, a 14-year-old boy who was later arrested and 2 other suspects threatened to stab the victim and forced him to withdraw money from an ATM. 2 NHS workers were mugged for ID badges outside of the University Lewisham Hospital in London. And then finally, 6 ambulances were vandalised in Kent, and they actually had holes that were drilled into their tyres. Now, at a time when of national emergency, when the nation is going to rely so heavily on the NHS and medical staff, it's worrying to see so many incidents targeting them. The next type of incident that I want to show you are attack on police officers. So again, the incidents, a police car was spat at, and that was located in Buckingham Street in Hull. Now, the police car was actually forced off the road while it had to be deep cleaned as a result of this incident. 2 police officers were injured when they responded to a domestic incident in Hartlepool. Now, the officers were bitten, punched and kicked as they tried to escort a man out of the property. A 45-year-old man of Belk Street has been charged with 2 counts of assault by beating an emergency worker. The worry here is that as incidents of domestic violence increase during this period of lockdown, is there then a knock-on effect that as police actually have to respond to these incidents, they are then more likely to end up being assaulted as part of the incident. A man coughed at a police officer claiming to have coronavirus in Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester. Now, that police officer actually had to self-isolate as a precaution of that incident. A man claimed to have coronavirus who threatened to spit at police officers in Denbighshire. A man was arrested for spitting in the inside of a police car, claiming to have COVID-19 in Coventry. Again, that vehicle had to be taken off the road whilst it was deep cleaned. A man spat at police officers, 3 police officers in Carlisle, and a thief spat on police in Rotherham Town Centre. An interesting incident, a man deliberately drove his moped at police officers in Trafalgar Square in London. Now, the suspect was said to have drove his moped at the officers before police discharged a taser, but was able to flee by driving up an alleyway, and a suspect aged 24 was later arrested. And finally, a man deliberately coughed at police officers in North Belfast. What I now want to show you are attacks on parking attendants. Now, we've recorded 2 incidents. Now, one's in Portsmouth, where parking wardens are facing a massive rise in abuse amid the COVID-19 lockdown. And up in Edinburgh, parking attendants also report being abused and spat at. Now, these incidents appear to be linked to a wider rising discontent and anxiety amongst the general population in relation to the outbreak of COVID-19. If I also just filter for the tag of youth crime, so with schools being closed, we've recorded an increase in youth crime, and I've already mentioned some incidents where youths targeted medical staff. I can now add the tag of youth crime and then exclude the medical sector from the filter, so we'll now not see any medical related youth crime incidents. So if I just go to affected sector and type in medical and then exclude that from the results. So these are the incidents involving youth crime. In Leeds, a 13-year-old was arrested by police for failing to comply with lockdown rules. Children smashed the windows of a bus carrying key workers in Armley. 4 teenagers robbed whiskey and other items from a property in Brampton Lane in Darlington. Youths coughed at supermarket customers claiming they had COVID-19 in Verwood. A bar was vandalised in Winterstoke Road in Weston-super-Mare, and a teenager was arrested for threatening a man in Linkford Close in Liverpool with a handgun. Now, following the last couple of weeks of panic buying, it's worth now looking at how the supermarkets and the retail sector have been impacted this week. So if I filter for the affected sector of retail, and then with the tag of youth crime, I can then exclude that, so we don't actually include any incidents that we've already mentioned. We can now see the incidents that have impacted the retail sector. So a man punched a supermarket worker in Morrison's in Plymstock. A woman threw tins at a supermarket worker at a Tesco Extra in Lichfield, and the reason was because she was limited to how many tins she could actually buy. A fight broke out at the tills of the range in Hull. A man actually claiming to be an NHS worker spat in the face of a bike store boss in Kembury Park. A cash machine was targeted at a Hereford supermarket. A hair salon was robbed during a COVID-19 lockdown in Glasgow. Burglars smashed through the front door of a Boots in Parkstone. A man broke into a fish and chips shop and stole a charity box in Cardiff. A man spat in a supermarket worker's face in Whitstable. A man stole a shopping after loading it into his car at an Asda in Chatham. Now, in this incident, it was actually click and collect, and the person who'd actually ordered the food had gone to pick it up, and it had actually been loaded into another person's car who had actually left with the shopping. There was a burglary of commercial premises in Lisburn, a ram raid at a supermarket in Fulwell in Sunderland, and on the previous day, there was also a ram raid at a convenience store in Bishop Wearmouth in Sunderland. A woman spat at shoppers in Morrison's branch in Brightmet. And there was an attempted robbery at gunpoint in Newchester Road in New Ferry. A man was arrested for coughing on a security guard in Belgrave Gate in Leicester. A pub was burgled by 4 perpetrators in Tottenham. Supermarket robbed at Knife Point in Bury St Edmunds. Delivery vehicles were damaged and stolen at Team Valley Trading Estate in Gateshead. It was actually a fleet of 36 vehicles which are used to deliver fresh produce to the NHS. And 2 supermarket delivery vans were also torched in Southmead in Bristol. Now we believe as this crisis goes on, we're going to see an increase in actual targeting of food delivery vans, as well as just delivery drivers in general, as there's going to be limited targets out there for criminal groups or bored youths to actually target. ATM robbery, an ATM targeted during a ram raid in Blythe. Now, what I also want to mention is, so we've mentioned the affected sector and of retail and the panic buying. I also want to look at food shortage as well. So if I just remove those tags and just go to food shortage, we've only recorded one incident in relation to food shortage. I'll just include that. And that's this incident here in Glasgow. So this was a homeless charity in Glasgow who were warning that they only have 2 days worth of supplies that are actually left. And they also warned that the homeless people are now actually fighting over food. Now that's the only incident of food shortage that we've recorded this week. Hate crimes are also on the increase. So if I just go to incident type and go to hate crime, and we can see the incidents that have occurred since last Monday's announcement. So we've already mentioned the nurse being racially abused on her way home from Southampton. There was far-right graffiti that was found in 2 locations in Carlisle. There was also anti-Semitic graffiti that was sprayed on an underpass in Peterborough. A council worker was racially abused over COVID-19 in Bristol. The incident took place outside an unspecified council building in the city. And a police report hate crimes aimed towards the Chinese community in Lewisham in London. What I also want to point out are that some specific organisations have been targeted during this period. So if I just go to involving, and I just go to JD Wetherspoons, we've reported 2 incidents of vandalism targeting Wetherspoons. And the first one is the Samuel Hall Wetherspoons in Sherwood, which is vandalised with graffiti, and the graffiti stated "Pay your staff." And the second one was the Wetherspoons pub in Crystal Palace in London. And again, this one stated "Pay up and pay your staff." So what we're actually seeing is, depending on how a company responds to the crisis and the potential layoff of workers, means that they may actually end up being a target for vandals. I also want to bring up the fraud icon. So I just go to fraud. Now, we've seen quite a few instances of fraud during this period in relation to COVID-19, so what I can do is also include the tag of COVID-19. So the fraud instance, so a man was arrested for selling fake COVID-19 treatment kits in West Sussex. On the same day, he appeared at Brighton Magistrates Court and was remanded in custody until the 20th of April. Newport Council warned of criminals doorstepping people trying to obtain gardening work. Vulnerable people are targeted by bogus callers pretending to offer COVID-19 tests in Edinburgh. Con artists called at a house in Stoke-on-Trent pretending to be police officers. And 3 people knocked on a door claiming to be police officers in Charlton Kings in Cheltenham. I also just want to bring up the incident type of infrastructure incident. Now, the bottom one is the Excel Centre, which was converted into NHS Nightingale, but the top one is an interesting one because in Dundee, refuse collectors have actually halved in number due to the COVID-19 crisis, and workers are either self-isolating or are staying at home because they have underlying health conditions. Now, this is an issue which could be is likely across the UK, and it runs the risk, as it states here, the lack of refuse collectors has also led to fears that the city streets will eventually overflow with waste from unemptied bins, and it depends on how large the outbreak and the infection is that actually targets the refuse collectors. Depends on whether or not we have the resource to actually go out there and actually collect the rubbish. So that's something that we're going to monitor across the UK because it has health implications. And the final incident type that I just want to bring up is arrest. There are a couple of interesting arrests this week. So this one, police seized £10,000 in cash and nitrous oxide canisters in Crawley. Now, police officers conducted the operation at a property in Arthur Road, and a police spokesperson said during the search, police discovered and seized around £10,000 in cash, as well as 100 nitrous oxide canisters and cannabis cultivation equipment. Now, we've actually seen some targeting of hospitals during the past 2 weeks. particularly targeting nitrous oxide canisters. So our analysis on that is that as there is a lack of drugs able to be distributed, there's an increase in price for those drugs. So therefore, people who are drug addicts are going out there and actually trying to find alternative sources to actually get high. So one is by stealing nitrous oxide canisters from hospitals, and the other one is this incident here. So a woman was arrested for endlessly driving around for no reason in Dorset. So the police reportedly pleaded with her to go home as she was putting other people's lives at risk. The woman replied as saying she did not care and she will do what she likes. She was arrested a short while later for breaching a dispersal notice. And that seems to be likely something that's going to change and adapt as we go forward. As the outbreak increases in the UK, the police will likely be more robust in how they actually enforce the regulations in relation to the lockdown. So that's it. That's what has happened over the last week since Boris Johnson made his announcement. Intelligence Fusion will continue to monitor all the details and all the incidents in relation to COVID-19, not just in the UK, but across the world.